There's a lot of data, all right? Well, first off, I'm really honored to be here. It's so much fun to come and see PME, and this is such a nice community that it's just been a joyful 2 days. I also just want to acknowledge Jere Confrey and Alan Maloney and Maisel Shaw, who read versions of this paper and helped me out a lot with it. So we're going to work pretty hard for this hour. I'm going to run you through a lot of different information. So hang in there with me and let's see where we get to. So this is actually the original woodcutting about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And this is sort of my pre-slide to tell you where we're going. And that is, I'm quite concerned in math education that as people have been resisting or high-stakes testing, there's also developed a tendency not to want to measure. And I think that's not a good thing for the field. So I'm going to try today to make the argument that how you can get measurement in and still have it be solid attention to cognition. I'm going to start with data that you all know, but I just want the context to be set. So this slide is the slide of the NAEP scores from 1990 to 2022, and generally just pointing out that it went up for a little while, it flattened out during that period between 2014 and 19, and then we all know when the pandemic came through, we had a rather precipitous drop. So that's the situation we face. But as we look at that, we also have to notice that during that drop, the declines for the lower percentiles were far more dramatic than the declines for the upper percentiles. And in addition, the distribution of effects of those drops were felt differently by different groups, with much higher drops for Black and for Hispanic students than for white students. Now, that's the general context, and we pay attention to those changes. But there's one thing that hasn't changed, and that is, if you look at these data from all the way 2005, 2015, and 2019, you'll notice the right-hand column is always 20 or 25 or 23. That means that 75% of our 12th graders are performing below proficiency regularly, standardly. And that's not a place that we ought to be. It brings back to mind a quote that Bob Moses said at the end of the pandemic prior to his death. And that is, he said, "As a nation, we stand with bated breath, waiting for public schools to reopen and for a return to normal, while ignoring that for many, normal is not only not good enough, it was never really very good." These data imply massive systemic failure. There is still a general trend in mathematics to knock kids off the boat without proven means of recovery. The inequitable outcomes during the pandemic, what they demonstrated most profoundly is how rapidly providing inequitable resources and supports ends up depressing performance. We have to affirm our commitment to a quality education as a constitutional right for all citizens. So I want to make in this talk an argument that what I'm going to talk to you about today can give us a both-and solution, both equity and better mathematical quality in our instruction. All right, as usual, you know if I'm here, I'm going to talk about a kid. So this is a real scenario. So a six-year-old, I asked him to explain to me what the digits in the number 314 mean. And he had some Dean's blocks there. And he pulled out 3 of the flats, as we call them, and 14 single blocks. And I thought, And then, as I was getting ready to think about what I'd do with them, he drew this picture on below it. And the picture had two boxes with a little line between them. And he said, it's like a clock. So my question to you is, if you were his teacher, what would your move be at this point? And you can talk with each other. I'm not going to give you much time, but what would you do? Okay, sorry, it was short, I know. Typically his notion would be ignored or corrected, missing the opportunity to see how it sheds light on the notion of place and the notion of value, and explains his response. Because of course in our base 10 system, we think of it as you have your ones, you have your tens, you have your hundreds, turning that way. And you can make trades as you go up, in 10 ones making a 10, 10 tens making 100. If you think about a digital clock, you have place and you do have value. So he sees that there are two different places in there, and there's certain values can go into each of those two places. Turns out that in the right one, you can go all the way up to 59, right? And then it's going to jump over and you're going to get another hour. And so if it was minutes, if there's a timer, it might be seconds. So he is showing us a rudimentary view of place value that he was able to do. And I'd never thought about a digital clock as a place value system or as a different place value system. So it took me a minute, it takes you a second or two to think about what the implications of that are, which include the fact, by the way, of course, in the minutes or the second, in any of the places on the clock, you still have the base 10 system in there because 14 is still 4 ones and a 10. But you also have this other, and the difference is, and what would been helpful to know from him and ask, is something about that exchange system. Did he understand that not only was there place and value, but did he understand how that exchange, which is a term that in the work of PME-NA, she talks about how the Chinese teachers are very careful to help students understand our base 10 system has a constant rate of decomposing a higher value unit, always times 10. Whereas in this system, it's not a constant value of doing that. So there's a lot in there to learn to see as you listen to what he did and think about what you might do from there. And in my own work over the years, I introduced way back when in '98 the notion of what I call the voice perspective dialectic. And what that means to me is when I listen to a kid, I recognize that I am a more expert mathematician, and so I have my perspective, my trained perspective that I have to listen to his voice through. And that's going to affect what I hear and what I'm aware of and how I interpret and how I notice in terms of what's going on. But the game for me is to flip that. And if I'm very careful to pay attention to voice, it often turns around and makes me grow in terms of what I understand is mathematics, or what is the mathematical idea. And learning to do this is a practice, and it takes time. And I try to think about sort of what it's like, because when I work with students, I try to teach them that it's also a belief. I just have a deep belief when kids talk to me, they're making sense. It's never a doubt to me. And the question is, how are they making sense? It's not a question about whether they're making sense. So I actually, we'll see if this slide works. Well, I'll show it to you first. I think it's kind of like this. You can kind of see, Can you see them? It's kind of like fireflies. You know how when you're out on an evening and you see that first firefly, and you know they've all been out there all that time, but you just saw that one. And then the next thing you know, you see two, and then three, and then you're like, whoa, they're everywhere. That's what it's like to learn how to listen to kids. These are not just quaint and charming anecdotes. Too often, students' conjectures and inventions fall on deaf ears to receive what in some ways I dislike the most, which is superficial encouragement. Oh, that's nice. That's a nice idea. Instead of ending up being made to feel welcome, engaged, and capable in mathematics, they end up feeling ignored. So to leverage student inventions, teachers need what Li Ping Ma called this profound understanding of fundamental mathematics as it's related to learning. And they need to learn how to weave from the conjecture of the invention towards the intended target, in this case place value, through dialogic interactions requiring traveling a hypothetical learning trajectory, as Marty Simon introduced us to the term. And the concern I have is Therese said this the other day, Rohana, we know a lot. We know a lot about student reasoning. The question is, are we getting that to teachers? Do they have a way systematically to know what we know in order to serve the needs of students? And then also, how do they learn to leverage it? So let's look at some standards around place value to see if they do the job. So this slide is your 3 sets of standards for kindergarten, first and second grade for place value. And you notice they do talk about a bundle. Well, the first one that's first let's just get the ranges out. So kindergarten, they really focus on 10 to 20, and then we focus on going up to 100, and then going up from there. So they talk about the bundles and the notion of introducing each time first ones, then ones and tens, and then 1 tens and hundreds. They go up like that. But there's nothing in there about that rate of decomposing the unit. They use the word composing and decomposing, but there's no attention to that. There's no attention to the fact that place value is a really cool word. It's place and value. And you have to take it apart and think about how you want kids to see that invention. So this is all a setup, of course, for me to say that what we really need are learning trajectories and a way for teachers to access them at scale and provide systematic access to patterns of student reasoning. So I'm not going to take a few minutes to talk about learning trajectories. First off, learning trajectories for me are built on genetic epistemology from Piaget, a super important idea, and the zone of proximal development from Vygotsky. Hence, by the way, when I hear in this conference that, well, learning trajectories are cognitive and we really ought to add some sociocultural I'm like, what? We have worked with those two theories for, since, 2000, maybe 90. It involves using both of those theories. The National Research Council describes them as successively more sophisticated ways of thinking about a topic that can follow one another as children learn and investigate a topic. And Doug Clements and Julie Sarama talk about domain-specific targets, a set of instructional tasks, and engender increasingly sophisticated reasoning and a description of levels. Now, I don't require the tasks in the work I do on learning trajectories because I want to use the tasks to test my trajectories. So I think tasks are really good to be illustrative, but I want to be able to generate multiple tasks for a level. So that's just a little difference in my thinking. All right, I find instead of using the latter, our research group and I use the idea of a climbing wall. And the reason I like the climbing wall is because it's out there and there's handholds and there's footholds on that wall, and you can know those in advance and you know where the obstacles are. But you're not saying every kid starts the wall in the same place, and you're not saying every kid takes the same path. But if you watch anybody on a climbing wall, they don't go everywhere. There are paths that you can see them worn in the wall that are the most typical ones. So you'll see when I talk later, I will use a ladder because it's nice and narrow and easy to draw. But in your head, think of a climbing wall. I also like to remind people that of these two columns. Learning trajectories are domain-specific models. They're not universal principles. They're expected probabilities. They are not stage theories. They are empirically based models of student thinking. They are not logical mathematical deconstructions. You don't get to be a mathematician, sit in a room, and just invent a learning trajectory based on your own thoughts about the mathematics. That can inform learning trajectories, and it does fundamentally, but it is not a learning trajectory unless you've done the empirical work. They're elicited by rich or novel tasks. They include strategies, reasons, explanations, and cases. They include exploring misconceptions rather than just avoiding them. They're ordered by increasing sophistication, and they are evolving. And that last one's really important for me to say that to you. I'm going to show you a system that has trajectories in it, but I'm going to show you a method by which we can change them. And I'm going to argue that we need to be a community that argues over them and tries different ways and experiments with them and comes up with new ones when there's new affordances from new technology, new tasks. All those will do that. All right. So just also to run your mind through it, this genetic epistemology thing. Actually, I had such a nice session yesterday with the productive thinking folks who had a problem just like that. And this is, so what's Persence's genetic epistemology? The question you ask the term is, what does this concept allow me to do that I couldn't do without it? What's the problem it's going to solve for me? And so, in a case of percents, it's the fact that you can find a way to describe relative size using a single number that can be easily compared. You can introduce kids to those simple problems. I think Connected Math uses this one. I think with Math in Context, I can't remember which, but given two size parking lots, which one's fuller? And then you have the question, does fuller means cars in the spaces, the number of cars in the spaces, or having more cars relative to the number of spaces? And that's a kind of genetic epistemological analysis of what the meaning of that might be. So, what I'm saying is I'm going to use this as a learning trajectory. My example, I'm going to use percent, so I just wanted to hit on it. Okay. So the challenge I want to pose to you at this point is to say, how can we leverage the concept of learning trajectories and related theories of learning to build a scalable systemic initiative to improve everyday classroom learning and instruction? We have got to move to scale. These are lovely studies, but we have got to be approaching the issue of scale, and we better find some very creative ways to do that in the next few years. So the answer for me is build a formative diagnostic assessment system, providing data to student progress along learning trajectories in real time, and make those data accessible to students and teachers. So that's the objective, to bring domain-specific knowledge from the learning sciences to the classroom and provide timely and relevant feedback to students and teachers, support students in their own learning, enrich teachers' understanding of students' responses and underlying mathematics, build this stuff in collaboration with practitioners, and avoid the disfiguring drawbacks of high-stakes testing. This is formative use. And the model we use in our work, we call it the Agile curriculum, is just the notion is there's actually two kinds of feedback. You teach something, and then you do a diagnostic assessment, and then you get that little short cycle feedback where you're using that to feed back to your instruction at that point in time. And then you have the teachers meet in PLCs, professional learning communities. They look across all their data, and then you think about, do you need to go back and do something with your class again, or do you need to do something differently next year? And by the way, these schools have teachers in there who are really good at different things. And if you can use a system like this, instead of looking for outside professional development, you've got inside use of each other's expertise. Okay, we doing okay? Yeah? Yeah? All right, so we went and built one of these with support from, I should say, the National Science Foundation and the Gates Foundation. And I decided to build it around big ideas because I did not want standards change and then you'd have to build it over again, and I didn't want to do that. So we show how the standards are connected to all our learning trajectories, but we built it around, actually, if you ignore the top two on the right, the other ones, we built it around those 9 big ideas in geometry, algebra, number, and probability and stats. And then we added those top 2 because we wanted to cover Algebra 1 because our schools wanted Algebra 1 for middle school. Now, when you go in on this map, which I'd love to show you live, but just wasn't going to be time, is you go in and zoom in on the map, and you see these clusters. And a cluster is a set of constructs that address a topic. So this is the cluster for key-percent relation. It's made up of 3 constructs: percent as a percent per 100, benchmark percents, and then above it, building on those 2, is percents as combinations of other percents. Each construct in this map, this is called Math Mapper, by the way, each one of those circles has a learning trajectory. If you click on it, it opens and it tells you the trajectory from bottom to top. And those little, wrong way, wait, this one. Those little guys, those little yellow guys, if you open them up, they tell you the associated misconception. If you flip it over, it tells you the correct conception. So we folded those in. So this is the trajectory I'm going to show you data on today, is benchmark percents. Not my favorite one in terms of complexity, but it's understandable. It's reasonably easy to understand, and so it will help us today. So as you might think, level 1 is understanding that 100% of a quantity means all of it, 0 means none of it, going to 50%, moving from there to your other benchmarks like 25, 75, all the way to 10, 5, and 1, and then being able to apply those benchmark percents to find percentages of numeric quantities and being able to find the size of the collection. So think of that as a 5-level learning trajectory. And what we did was we went out and we built 3 different kinds of assessment. And the one I'm most going to talk about is the cluster. We can assess on that whole cluster by sampling items and levels from the different trajectories, or we can assess on a single construct, and as we ended the project, we were building one for individual items. In this project, in the span of 4 years, of only 8 to 10 people's work, we built 2,500 items that we wrote ourselves to go with the levels. They're conceptual and they're tied, each one is tied to the level. We had practitioners who reviewed them with us. Each item corresponds to a level, and below that you can see the kinds of items that we could do. Now again, it's not the fanciest kinds of items, because we were trying to build prototype in a reasonable amount of time, and we're not a corporation that might have enough to do really fancy ones, but you know, if you can get the idea, you can add item types. That's not the hardest thing in the world. So that's what they were. All right, so the kids come in, they take this test, it's 8 to 12 items. The teacher assigns it to the class, the kids take the assessment, and it's 8 to 12 items, and immediately after they take it, they submit it, and it says, they get something that says, see your results. And if they open up the results, they see something like this. You'll notice that it looks kind of like the map. And so right here is our benchmark percents. The students got 89% on benchmark percents. And here's what they got on the other 2. And if they come over here, it's not very bright, but there's some blue on this. If the level was, this student got light blue on level 1 and 3 and 5, I think. If it's light blue, they got partial credit. If it's dark blue, they got full credit. If it's white, they didn't get an item at that level. And if it's orange, they got it wrong. So they immediately get their results. And then they can scroll down from here. They can open up any problem. They can see what answer they gave. And they have an opportunity to either revise and resubmit or reveal the answer. So, and if they do the revise and resubmit, that's what this bright green is. That means that somebody did a revise and resubmit and got it right. So teachers know what was initially right, what was ultimately right. That's what it looks like for students. This is what it looks like for teachers. This is called a heat map. These are the same three constructs, and these are real data. And I'm going to just show you how to read a heat map. So a heat map, a student is a vertical set of squares. So at the left there, the set of squares there, is the student that performed the weakest in this class on this construct. And on the right is the student that performed the strongest in this class on this construct. And they're ordered from weaker to stronger in performance. And you can see that that's going to cause you to have more blue in the bottom corner, more orange in the upper right. And what teachers then do is they imagine a kind of arc. And things are going pretty well down in the right corner and not so well in the upper left corner in terms of needs. And what they can do with that is they can say, oh, well, these are the levels I need to work on. Or they can say, these are the kids that need extra help. And they have access to both sets of that information. By the way, they can also go click on any of those levels and they can see the problems at that level, they can access their answers, they can access the item analysis, they can share them with their class, and you'll see them do that in just a second. So this is what I mean by giving data back in real time relative to instruction that can guide classroom interactions. Supporting teachers to review heat maps with classes is a key component of MathMapper. And we had two partners, we had two districts. One was a rural district in North Carolina with a high needs population, and the other was a suburban district with a less diverse population. And I want you to see a video of a teacher returning data. So how is MM used in the classroom? Now the best video I could give you, and keep it short, actually was about a cluster that was a combination of relations and functions and qualitative graphing. So that's the particular cluster you're going to see her give data back. You're going to see three parts of the video. She's going to view the heat map as a class. She's going to talk about selecting and reviewing a problem with the class. And she's going to discuss what was learned by practicing or resubmitting. The problem she's going to do is our old favorite in qualitative graphing. You go into a store on a flat road, and the question is which of these behaviors or statements at the left correspond to the graphs. So you're trying to see if they actually can read those graphs accurately. Okay, let's listen to what we hear.
We talked about student reports, and you guys looked at them, and you guys get feedback individually. As a teacher, I get this. If you are here in this section, you might be here in this section. What did you notice looking at this? We call this a heat map.
The class better understood relations and functions and laws of regression.
You got it. Okay. So what does that tell me, Ellery?
You need to work on qualitative graphing with us.
Right. As a group, we need to maybe reteach that topic, spend more time on it. Okay. Number, and that number is a level. Is there any specific number that stands out to you?
Number one.
Number one. So, this is what I get to do when I see stuff like this, is I pull it up. So this is what we're going to look at now as a class, and let's see if we can make some sense out of it. So I want to read it? Go ahead, Brianna.
A person is walking along a flat road between her home and the store. Graph 1 and graph 2 represent two different parts of the track.
So which statement in the table, A to G, most likely describes graph 1? Now, before we look at this, what do you think is a common misconception here?
Because of the slope, you might think it's like going downhill or going up a hill.
Exactly. Someone's going to say I'm going down a hill. Someone's going to say I'm going up a hill. Is that true?
No.
Why not? What tells you that? Alex?
Because none of the axes say height.
They don't say height. What do they say?
They say distance from home and time.
Distance from home and time. saw by taking the time to do either practice or revision? And then what's one thing that you still think we need to work on?
Okay, so we felt that if we put more time into it, the questions kind of got easier, and we took more of our time on it, and we got more from it.
And why do you think it got easier?
Because you're practicing it more.
You're practicing it and
Because you're like looking at the directions and seeing like if you said in the example, if it was going up a hill, if it was flat.
you're looking at the labels of the axes, right? We're using what we've done in the past and applying it to new stuff that we've done with functions. So what this SUDS really is reviewing is everything we've done this year. It's bringing it all together and putting it in graphs. And we're supposed to analyze these graphs, explain what they mean, apply it to real life.
Now, I hope you can hear in that this is the idea of assessment for learning. These kids, first off, they've worked these problems. So they actually already have a relationship to them, which makes a big difference. They also, as you could see there, they start using the language of the map. And they talk to each other, talking about unit ratios and other things that I can do this, but I can't do that. And I think that's really good. It's really important that they're part of the game. They're part of the assessment process, so it doesn't feel like it's being done to you. There's also tons of things to say about different teachers and how they do these reviews. One of which is, at first they think the problem is a problem and they're just trying to fix the problem that the kids did. It takes time for them to learn the problem is an example of the level, and there's others. And the level is situating in a trajectory, which is telling them about motion. And it's motion between the levels that we're aiming at. And that takes some examples and experience to help teachers get past that. Okay.
We talked about.
All right. The other thing I said at the beginning was about measurement. We also engaged in serious efforts to do validation. Hats off to VMed. There you are, guys. Because we needed validated information to go back. So we used IRT, we tried some other models. I'm not a psychometrician. I got good enough to be able to read and understand them, but I would not choose models. But fundamentally, just this picture I wanted to show you, which is, we started out by checking to see if the clusters were correlated, to make sure they belong together. And then we moved to looking to see, the expectation is that these are the item numbers, and what you expect is as the levels go up, your item difficulty should go up. We don't look for perfect behavior. We don't even want perfect behavior. We all know as math teachers how to move something up and down. I just change the number and make it a decimal or a different kind of fraction. It's not about that. It's about being true to the level and the measurement of the level and trying to see if in fact the trajectories work. So we do a lot of work with these and modeling them, and we check our heat maps to see if the data going back to teachers and students looks valid and seems valid relative to their practice, which includes the curriculum they're using in the schools, and then talk about how to act on the data for instruction. And I'll tell you, I'll admit right here, there's no way we really got deep into the act on the data part where you could have some interventions or things to follow this, because it's out of scope. But this whole thing is digital in a map such that there's a library there if you wanted to put things in for that purpose. I hope I wasn't putting that in anybody's eyes. I tell my grandkids all the time, don't put the flashlights there. I'm sorry. Anyway, you could do that. Okay, just one little wave at effectiveness, and that was, we did find in our lower SES school a positive correlation between increased use of MathMapper and gains on the state tests. For teachers, assigning 100 or more of these tests was correlated with gains of 0.88 on a 5-point scale in the end of course, and for students taking 5 more MathMapper's tests correlated with a gain of 0.4 on the end of course. It's correlational. I wouldn't stand behind it deeply. I'm going to talk in a minute about what it takes to actually do serious, deeper studies than we could do. But it's good news. I'll take it. I also want to say that in validation, we built pretty good learning trajectories, but they're not perfect. Some of them we had to throw out completely. Probability, we did an awful job. I spent another whole year studying probability research to figure out how to do that one. But from round 1 to round 2, the percentage of moderate correlations for the construct decreased from 46% of the 54 constructs that we had learning trajectories for down to 19%. And our last round of validation, 44 out of 63 constructs with sufficient data, 19% had moderate correlations and 73% had strong correlations. And that's not bad. And again, there's so much to say about item difficulty is not the same as understanding a learning trajectory, and so the models are only suggestive. There's a lot more to do, but it's the right direction, and we can do that kind of study, and we can give people some confidence about the kind of work. All right, so what I want to say, and where I want to go from here, is actually the part of the talk I most wanted to give you, so I'm going to try to do at least some chunk of it. And that's because the question is, what do we learn about the systems out there and trying to use these in real school systems? And how would you create a learning trajectory-based assessment system K-12? Because I think it's absolutely possible. So asking if MathMapper works is the wrong question. And I want to just remind you that if you look at drug trials, there's not one, you don't go right to an effectiveness trial. You first have to find out if the drug works, is the treatment safe, does the treatment work? Are people really doing it in real settings? Is it better than what's already available? And what else do we need to know? So we only were doing a design-based implementation study, and the question one is what works for whom, to what degree, and how, and under what conditions, and what effects when MathMapper works. So the last part of my talk, which was the new part for me, was to try and talk about what I'm calling system dynamics for an LTDA. And dynamics is the study of the effects of forces on the motion of objects in a system. So I think dynamics is a neat term to use for this, because it turns out these things make it so either the system's working well or the system's working less well. And so it is its own force on the system. So I'm going to go through, I'm not going to make it through 5 of them. The first one is just, you've got to have timely, valid, and relevant information. Information's got to be actually, it's got to do what it says it's going to do. Dynamic 2, the student autonomy and agency has to be fostered. If it's treated as this is the same kind of test as every other kind of test, then you're not going to bring the kids into it, you're not going to give them power over what they're doing, and it's not going to shift to a learner-centered set of instruction. Dynamic 3 is challenging restrictive and unproductive beliefs about learning potentials. Dynamic 4 is working with teachers' professional knowledge, and Dynamic 5 is working within the system, including psychometricians, learning scientists, practitioners. All right, so Dynamic 1, I'm just going to show you this. These are called ribbon diagrams, and this is just to show you that not only do you get the information back to a class, but you can look across classes and across grades, and you're looking for orange, remember, is wrong, and blue is right. We matched it in directionality to the map. So you can see that it is behaving like a trajectory, generally. And there is something with level 3 that actually we ended up retiring the item in level 3. That one was misbehaving. So we looked at data like this. Dynamic 2 is giving LT situated, in a context for assessment that fosters agency mindset and student agency. Yes, thank you. And this is just something I want to show you, which is we have equated tests for every test. So they can take multiple tests and see how they do. And when kids first take a test with this, their scores are going to be way lower than they get normally in schools. They are not getting the 90 to 100 scores. But it does turn out that if you give the test again, they do make motion towards improvement. But if we want to succeed in getting to proficiency, you've got to stick with it to proficiency. And the few times we've had them follow up with the teachers and really work with them in the results of the assessments, then they moved and we saw this kind of performance, and that's what we should be looking for. In terms of this question about working in equity settings, I also just want to say that this, again, it can be a group process. So in our work with Maisha Moses, Bob's daughter, and the Young People's Project, we work with math literacy workers who are going to work with middle school students, and we use MathMapper to help them understand their mathematics better. And the process they went through was a group of them would get together and they would help each other turn the heat map blue, as they said. They work collaboratively and do that. So again, you can change your mind about how to use the affordances of these tools in classrooms. The third one I'm going to skip. I'll just tell you that the tool allows you to pick, say, the top 4 people on that one construct and look where they perform in the other constructs. Kids do not perform the same across items. Teachers think smart kids are smart and they always do smart things, and kids who are less successful are always doing the less successful things. Even within a cluster, we see dramatic differences, and you could make up a story for each of those kids I know, and it would be a different story by why they get that. Thank you. Dynamic 4 then is about teacher professional development, and I can't tell you too much about that story. I'm going to skip that one. But our teachers at first were very nervous about sharing their data with each other. But that was the model. They would bring back the data, one would present, and then they'd talk about it. And all of a sudden we had productive conversations in the schools about how to teach different topics way more regularly than would be typical. And the one story I tell you was, in this one school, one teacher went up and she showed her performance on any item that involved percents above 100, terrible. It was all orange. And she looked at it and she goes, I forgot to teach that. And she looked around the room and every other teacher was going, so do we. And if you think about the standards, by the way, you look at the standards under percent, there's only 2 little bitty standards in there, and they really don't get at what's involved with understanding percents above 100. So you can have great interactions, and it takes time. And I want to just say with that, you can't do this in a second. You have to do this over years, slowly working together. And the last dynamic that I'll sort of end on is that this takes a collaboration among learning scientists, psychometricians, teachers, and students towards iterative improvement. And there's no reason we do psychometrics the way we do it right now with these agencies and all. They're sort of once a year. Software can be looked at all the time. Data can be looked at all the time. You can be working on a constant basis to strengthen and improve, and you can argue over all kinds of things that will have impacts on your learning trajectories, and people learn a lot. So, to grow a successful, this is my closer, an effective learning trajectory assessment system, it has to be formative and low stakes. It has to be assessment for learning. It has to be diagnostic, validly. It's got to be scalable in your design, and it's got to be collaborative in who does it. We have huge challenges on that right now because of the anti-testing, including in this community, which is why we didn't get our continued funding, because we had people saying things like, well, you can't use multiple choice questions, and what are you doing using validity measurement and psychometric approaches? And it's like, really? We have to realize there's ways to get where we want to go, and we have to get literate enough to know what that kind of thing looks like, so that we can support some of these broader solutions. But it's also a problem because assessment providers want to protect weaker products. Teachers are overwhelmed. There's a lack of sustained content development. People are doing standard by standard rather than learning trajectory series, and there's insufficient terms to maturation for prototypes. So to conclude, I think the equity things are apparent here. Sometimes you have to kind of hit them again, but making specific the needs of students and giving them immediate visibility is really helpful. Strengthening student agency, recruiting students as partners in learning. Demonstrating empirically to teachers that different students learn different aspects with ease or difficulty. Using grouping flexibly. Nothing wrong with grouping, you just don't have to keep them in it all the time because they're going to be in a different group because they're going to have a different profile and a different cluster. So let the groups change. And provide ongoing opportunities to strengthen professional capacity and collaborative activities around conceptual depth and rigor. And I just end by saying, I think Bob has been calling on us in so many ways, especially when he articulates that math is a civil right, that we had to build something new, something bold, something collaborative, together, flexible, and scalable. Thank you.
Questions?
Hi, I'm Kim. Thank you so much, Dr. Confrey. I noticed something, and so I'm going to say what I noticed, and then I would just love to hear your thoughts. And actually, you did sort of say something about what I noticed, so I'm curious if you want to elaborate on this. I noticed that on the slide where you showed the data across the courses, there was, I think the wording was like 6th grade advanced and 6th grade regular and 7th grade advanced and 7th. And I noticed obviously just quickly looking at the heat maps that I think, well, and I'm going to make a conjecture here, I think many middle school teachers would be surprised to see that there wasn't, at least in the maps that you showed us, an enormous amount of difference between, for instance, 6th grade regular and 6th grade advanced, and similar with 7th grade. And I spend most of my time in K-12 classrooms, and I very, very often think to myself and say to folks that what I see in students' understandings, these understandings that you're getting at in these in the constructs and in the learning trajectories, are really often not that different, if almost at all, between these levels that we name courses. So this is an observation. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
I mean, we don't get we didn't get enough data over time to be able to really explore that. I agree with you, what you saw. The other point I want to make about those, did you notice that no students are doing well on the upper levels? We are not getting kids to the top levels of these trajectories. So I think that's really important. And I love how you looked at it, right? Because you like to look at 6th grade regular and 6th grade advanced. You'd like to look at 6th grade and then 7th grade. Now remember, these data are not 6th graders who became 7th graders. So but the profiles that you saw are very typical, and how one explains and understands that is an area that's wide open for further investigation were you to have these data. Thank you for your question.
Hi, over here. Hi. Thank you so much. This was really interesting. I first want to say just an observation and then a question. So first of all, thank you so much for turning this orange and not red, because I feel that this has some emotional aspect to that. So this is a good design choice, in my opinion. My question is, so you build those trajectories on the student level, and then you have teachers engage with those trajectories, and then there's in the level of researcher. So my question is, how do you build the feedback in order to get data from the teachers, so you as a researcher can help them revise the tool and do the trajectories on the upper level, and then translate this to the students back. So my question is about the feedback loop for the teacher and the researcher.
This is a great question. And by the way, those colors are also for colorblindness. Both my boys are colorblind, so I try to stay away from red and green. But I also agree with you on the sense of red. That's a really complicated question. We, first off, our supervisor in the settings is so important, and they often are the ones that are doing some of that bridging. We also spend a lot of time in those schools, watching the classes, watching the videotapes. The schools run teaching experiments, learning lesson studies. One of the papers where we did a lesson study, and so we're listening that way. But we're also listening to, there's just sometimes really simple practical things, like we put integers in with with decimals and fractions, because we thought that looked nice together. And the teachers came back in no uncertain terms and said, we don't teach integers when we teach fractions and decimals. We teach integers when we teach graphing. And so there's a lot of practical things, and they were comfortable enough. They would tell us in no uncertain terms. It was teachers who told us they wanted the misconceptions built in. So a lot of it is just opening up those conversations and staying with them over the years to try and bring those together. But you do have to also work on the power relationships and try to make sure people are comfortable in settings and feel like if they are uneasy or don't understand something, that you're going to try to hear what they're saying. The notion there, Rich Lair calls it a trading zone, and I love that idea, is you need to set up a different kind of interaction. Thank you.
Hey, Jere, thank you for your presentation. It's always very nice to hear you talk. It's clearly laid out. I was just thinking as we went through things about the connection of lesson study, so I appreciate the plug there. I think that's an important part. My question comes basically at the end. It was something I was thinking about through the process because I'm from the state of Ohio here, and we're currently, for the past year, been working on ideas for an Ohio math plan. And so I'm wondering about that last word in the words from Bob Moses about scalability. Can you talk to us about, within the constraints of the current education system, how you might see this as scalable? Thank you.
Not very well, because we worked really hard to get commercial partners, and were not successful, or came really close, and then they would say, well, we don't want to cannibalize our existing assessments, so we're not. Or actually here in Cleveland, I don't know if anybody's here from the Cleveland City Schools. We came into Cleveland City Schools to talk to them about using MathMapper, and everybody loves it. Everybody says this is what we should be doing. But the response we got was, in the Cleveland City Schools, the people who do professional development are in one group, and the ones that do curriculum are in another group, and the ones who do assessment are in another group, and never the twain shall meet. So to try and get an initiative, and as you might imagine, you can't throw 700 initiatives at people when they're doing this. They have to be able to do it, stick with it, and grow it. So I have been tearing my hair out about how to, sadly, I think the answer could be it's going to go sit on the shelf with other beautiful things that we all built and they don't grow. We're still having conversations to try and not have that happen. So I don't have a good answer to that one, because I think we are not organized in schools to do this and persist with it and see how to make it. I do think there's a lot of potential lift in the notion of diagnostics, because there's no reason, parents will come with us on that, right? They want to know what the kids need. So we didn't do a lot of work to try and reach out to parents, and I think that probably is one direction in. But actually, I'm sort of hoping you all would have some good ideas, and we would love to pass it on and to work with other people to keep it going or to go in other ways. We hate to see this die. All my life I've done prototypes. That's sort of what I do, but But it would be really, it should be scalable, but I don't have a good answer. Sorry.
Hi, Jere, Melissa. Thank you so much for your talk. Value your work. You've talked a lot about equity, and I know that your work is really grounded in supporting all students' growth. Sometimes when I've been in workshops with psychometricians in the past, I've found that some of the tenets of their philosophies can be at odds with equity work. And I wonder, in your work on the assessment and collaboration with psychometricians, if you felt any tension between maybe some of the operating principles that they came with versus what you came with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's definitely crossing communities, right? There's a different sort of orientation. So, I mean, number one, if you do this work, you gotta get a great psychometrician who can communicate. I fired one because they just made too many things too hard to understand. And being a I don't understand it from the psychometric point of view always, but they were math, right? I mean, it was like linear regression, linear lines, like I can understand that. We need to figure out what we're arguing about. So one thing is, I think, is you just have to find the right people who will do this, which there are out there. People who are flexible with models. They're not wedded to particular models. The other thing, and that we've done a paper or two where when we do the validation process, we look at items that are potentially non-performing, like they're not in the right place. We had spirited debates between learning scientists and psychometricians about what the implication of that was. And it's complicated. You have to look at who the students are that took the item. You have to look at, what, is it a problem with the level? Is it a problem with the item, with the numbers in the items? We had 7 different things that you could end up choosing to do with every one of those items. We kept long historic records of what happened to our items and where they were. So that's all to say, good documentation helps those conversations, because you got to argue in evidence with them, not become a psychometrician, but learn enough to be able to do that and make them do the same in the other direction, so that you can bring those things to the table. It's a really important process to figure out how to do it. But there's some people in psychometrics out there that are quite talented. What's that?
The low stakes aspect of it makes a big difference.
Can't hear.
The low stakes aspect of it makes a big difference.
Oh yeah, that's true too. Alan was just saying that the fact that it's low stakes makes a big difference too. For instance, because you didn't hear me say reliability. I actually don't check reliability. I don't need reliability in the settings that we're working with, right? It's not central. And psychometricians love reliability. I mean, because it's got really definite formulas, and that's what gets taken into court on high stakes testing. And so there's a reason why they really love reliability, but it's kind of nice not to deal with. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hey, Jere. So I don't know if this is something you guys have worked with or not, but I was thinking about scalability. And the teachers we work with in our local school district talk about being overwhelmed. What are your thoughts on, like, and I don't know the right verb here, so don't latch on to this, but like wedding this or embedding this or building a curriculum around Math Mapper that would help, like, now we have a one package that this is what you need.
Yeah, I think a consistent curriculum around it would be valuable, and that we did build some curriculum when we were doing studies. I didn't show you is that you actually, like I was saying, right next to the constructs, there's a link to the assessment, there's a link to a library, and that is a set of free resources that we looked on the web, and then we just built a bunch of free resources, and it's a resourcer, and you can search it, and it's also an expandable database. So my answer to you, I think, is I would love to see consistent curriculum, especially to run some experiments. But I actually think, and given the data that's out there, teachers aren't using consistent curriculum. they are using a variety of stuff. And so I actually would prefer to think about ways to actually build in the possibility, which would include some consistent curriculum that you could opt to choose, but also would allow people to put their favorites in and or add to it. And that whole thing was designed so that those changes could be implemented only at a district. So if a district didn't want other stuff coming in, you didn't have to. There's a lot of real complexity behind the scenes in the software that I didn't go over today, but that's how I would deal with it. But I think developing some around the learning trajectory specifically would be fascinating. If I could live a lot more years, I would do that. Good. All right. Thank you so much.